Preface of the Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgoni. Preface. These lessons were issued to a few of my pupils as private studies in occultism several years ago. The time has now come to give them to the world as a companion to the first volume of The Light of Egypt. It is the duty of occult students to familiarize themselves with the subjects herein discussed. They should know the ideas of our ancestors regarding them and be familiar with their thought, in order to appreciate the sublime wisdom and knowledge of nature as taught by them. Otherwise, we are sure to do them, as well as ourselves, great injustice. The history of occultism bears out the fact that there is very little that is new to the present time. The arrangement and classification of thought differs during each cycle of time on the different spirals, and, like the fruitage on lower rounds of nature's progressive wheel of destiny, variety and quality are diverse, so likewise do we find the mental manifestations. This age, however, is blessed with a great variety and abundance of thought in clear-cut language that should enlighten the races of the earth with Mother Nature's modus operandi in every department of human thought. We hope these chapters will aid to this end, and doubtless many students will find in them the key to unlock the mysteries veiled in symbol and hieroglyphic by ancient writers. The author's object has been to make plain and easy of understanding these subjects. Much, however, has been left for private study and research, for many large volumes might be filled if a detailed description of each subject were entered upon, which task is left for those who feel so inclined. A rich reward is in store for those spiritual investigators who will follow out the paths and lines herein mapped out on spiritual astrology, alchemy, and other subjects. Meditation and aspiration will open up hidden treasures that will prove a boon to occult students, for astrology and alchemy are the two grand sciences that explain the why and reasons for what we see and experience on every plane of life. In this age, there should be no concealing of these divine truths. We cannot hide anything in the air, and for this reason, the Sun in Aquarius will unearth and reveal to man all that the present cycle has to give during the Sun's passage through this airy sign. The watery sign, Pisces, through which the Sun manifested during the past 2,160 years, gave up to man their secret powers and hidden attributes in steam as a motive power, which man has completely mastered. He will likewise master the airy forces during the present subcycle of the Sun in Aquarius. Already we see him using liquid air and compressed air as a motive power, which will gradually take the place of steam as the Sun gets farther into the sign or constellation of Aquarius. Men will become immensely wiser than they have been, and it is to be hoped they will leave the written record of their achievements in science and art to show to future races their status of mind on every subject, for the edification and enlightenment of coming races. Our ancestors were denied this great privilege. Consequently, their wisdom is only symbolized to us in a way that it is difficult to read and interpret correctly. Yet, we who have the key to their symbols can read accurately the truth they wish to convey, which stands out clearly to all capable of understanding and interpreting symbolism and correspondence correctly. History and nature repeat themselves in every cycle of time. Therefore, these forces and potentialities are natural to the sign through which the Sun manifests. We can go backward or forward through the Sun zodiac and read correctly the history of the horary past, as well as the present and future, by bearing in mind the sign and cycle in manifestation at any given period. When the proper time arrives, a work will be given to the world to prove to mankind the law of cycles. God is present in all ages and races, manifesting His love and wisdom throughout infinite creations, and that He records, in His own way, the most detailed record of any event which takes place, thus giving to man a complete history of His works and will, for man's enlightenment, so that he, too, may cooperate intelligently with his God in every way that intelligent wills to manifest. Prehistoric history is not blotted out from nature's laboratory. The astral book of karmic evolution will one day reveal its hidden treasures to a waiting world in such a manner as to surprise and enlighten mankind, as the recording angels give up those gems of truth they have so jealously guarded for untold cycles of time, simply because the time was not ripe for its divulgence. There is a time for everything, and when that time arrives, all past history of our planet's evolution will be written in an intelligent manner for the illumination and education of man as the masterpiece of the living God. In this way, man will worship Deity and perfect his God nature, even to angelhood. If this volume of The Light of Egypt meets with the same appreciation that was accorded the first volume, which has passed through 4 editions and is still growing in favor every day, besides being translated into the French, the author will feel that his efforts have not been wasted, and he trusts the race will have been made better for having read his writings. As this is his posthumous contribution to the world, the author wishes in this connection to pay a debt of gratitude and grateful recognition to his esteemed pupil and friend, Dr. Henry Wagner, who has so generously published nearly all of his writings. Without his aid and assistance, we would not have been able of ourselves to have given these works to the world. Therefore, honor to whom honor is due. Mrs. Belle M. Wagner has been chosen by the masters as my spiritual successor and representative of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, and thus perpetuate the chain of outward connection between those in the realm of the higher life with those upon the outward plane. She is our choice and a most worthy one to take my place. I make this statement in this connection for the benefit of my pupils and Hermetic students generally, as I am being personated by frauds and impostors, claiming to be Zanoni, Verbam, Sap. It is my request that a facsimile of my signature and symbol accompany this preface. Dictated by the author from the subjective plane of life, to which he ascended several years ago, through the law of mental transfer, well known to all occultists, he is enabled again to speak with those who are still upon the objective plane of life. The editions found in this volume, not in the original manuscripts, have been supplied in this manner. The 2 planes of life, the objective and subjective, are scientific facts, no longer disputed by well-informed minds, and the exchange of thought will become almost universal among educated minds during the present cycle. Hence, great progress will come to the earth during the next 2,160 years, while the sun manifests his glorious influence through the symbol of the man. Thanking each and all who have aided in any way to give my writings to the world, I am, in love and fraternal greetings, ever yours, Omnia Vincent Veritas. End of the preface. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 1 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Volume 2, Introduction. What study is more sublime, inspiring, and profitable, in the highest sense, than the language of the stars? Those silent monitors of the midnight sky, who reveal His will as secondary causes in the administration of universal law. The science of the stars is the divine parent of all science. The more earnest our study, the more recondite our research and thorough our investigation of the science of the stars, the more fully shall we realize the truth of the teacher's words. Astrology is the key that opens the doors to all occult knowledge. It is the key that unlocks the mysteries of man's being, his why, whence, whither. Within the temple of Urania lies concealed the mystery of life. The indices are there, written by the finger of the Infinite in the heavens above. It is our privilege to make this language our own, and it should be the earnest work of every true student of nature to acquire a right understanding and correct interpretation of these divine symbols. And as thorough students of any language seek out the derivation of words and expressions, search for the root or stem word and its origin, so should the student of astrology, by sincere desire and earnest study, seek to know the origin and root of these starry words and complex expressions of the language of the stars. The sun, moon, and 5 planets of our solar system are to us symbols of the reflected and refracted rays of the triune attributes of the great central spiritual sun, life, light, and love, analogous to the 3 primary colors in nature, which become still further refracted into 4 secondary or complementary colors, rays, or attributes, the 7 constituting the active principles of nature, the 7 rays of the solar spectrum, the 7 notes of a perfect musical scale, there being throughout a perfect correspondence, and all are but different modes of vibration or activities of the Supreme Intelligence. And as we know, the 7 rays of color reflect an almost infinite variety of tints, that octave upon octave are built upon the 7 natural tones in music. So also are these 7 active principles divided and subdivided into innumerable forms, qualities, and manifestations of the first trinity: life, light, love. Life being the manifestation of the second 2, love and wisdom, which in turn are the dual expressions of the one. Upon the knowledge of these divine truths, Pythagoras built the theory of the music of the spheres. Let us pause and listen to this celestial music. Suns and their systems of planets sound forth the deep bass tones and rich tenor, while angelic races take the silvery treble of the divine melody, octave upon octave, by more and ever more ethereal system upon system, to the very throne of Deity, the infinite, eternal source of light, life, and love. Let us learn through the knowledge of the stars to attune our souls to vibrate to the divine harmony, so that we may take our places in the celestial choir and blend our voices with those of the celestial singers, chanting the divine anthem, "We praise thee, O God." To resume, if we would gain a correct knowledge of astral science, we should study astrology in its universal application, side by side with its more intricate phase and the details, as manifested upon the individual man and his material destiny. Let us digress for a moment. The intellectual minds, the material scientists who cavil at the science of the stars, declaring it to be mere fortune telling, consequently false, do but air their ignorance of this most profound subject, not knowing that it embraces and contains all sciences, all religions that have ever been or ever will be, comprises all history of every age, of races, empires, and nations, that it is the only true chronology, and marks the destiny not only of personal man on every plane, but of the human family as a whole. All mythologies find their explanation in this starry language, and every religion is founded upon the movements of our solar system. The rise and fall of empires and races of men are written in its pages. To master as far as we are capable and our limited space of life here will permit, we must pursue the study in its broad sense, as already stated, in the external application of the starry influx, and upon the interior planes of action from God to the mineral to man, I, and man to the angel, finding in every section a complete and perfect correspondence. To master the alphabet should be the first step, whose vowels, diphthongs, and consonants are the planets and shining zodiac. It is very essential to clearly comprehend the action and reaction of the planets upon the human organism as an integral part of the universal organism, ever remembering that the starry vowels, in combination with the consonants or zodiac, form the infinite expressions comprising the language of the starry heavens in their threefold manifestation upon the external planes of life, while the radiant constellations are the ideas which find expression through this language, which is likewise a science, accurate in its mathematical construction and perfect in geometric proportion. The student should ever bear in mind that astrology, like every other science, is progressive. The underlying principles are always the same. These are like the laws of the Medes and Persians, but the plane of action is constantly changing. It is a well-established and indisputable truth that from the sun, the solar center of our system, is derived all force, every power and variety of phenomena that manifests itself upon Mother Earth. Therefore, when we remember that the solar parent passes through one sign of his celestial zodiac in 2,160 years, a 12th part of his orbit of 25,920 years, we see that from each sign in turn, he, the sun, rays forth an influx peculiar to that special sign, and as there are no two signs alike in nature or quality, hence the passage of the sun from one sign into another causes a change of polarity in planetary action, which can be fully demonstrated and conclusively proven. It follows as a natural sequence that the rules formulated and taught by astrologers in reference to the plane of planetary influence in one subcycle will not hold good in the next. To illustrate, in the year 1881, the sun passed from the sign Pisces into Aquarius, thus beginning a new cycle of solar force. The human race has entered upon a cycle in every respect differing in nature and action from the past cycle of 2,160 years. The sign Aquarius is masculine, electric, positive. It is intellectual in character, scientific, philosophic, artistic, intuitive, and metaphysical. It is the sign of the man. The truths of the past are becoming etherealized. Our solar parent has scarcely crossed the threshold of the sign Aquarius, and already we observe in many directions the activities of the peculiar influx. True, it is but the first flush of the dawn of a new era, the harbinger of a glorious day to our race. In the light of this truth, ponder well on the nature of the influx radiating from the solar center, each orb of his shining family absorbing a different ray or attribute of solar energy, corresponding to its own peculiar nature. The Earth, in her annual passage about her solar parent, receives the harmonious or discordant vibrations of this astral influx, according to the many angles she forms to the various planets. We see, then, that the Earth is enveloped in an atmosphere or zone of occult force we recognize as humane, mental, positive, etc., acting and reacting upon the human family through the laws of vibration in strict and exact ratio to its interior capacity to receive and ability to externalize upon the material plane of being. The results, as far as this stage of existence goes, will be manifest as man vibrates harmoniously or otherwise to the stellar cause. The present subcycle producing an entirely different influence to that of the past cycle, whose force was watery, magnetic, and feminine, causes a wearing of elements, confusion, and uncertainty, until the old are displaced by the new conditions. We should learn from these facts that it is folly to brand as false and condemn as worthless the rules and formulas, and even religious thought of the past when we find upon careful investigation and crucial tests their inadequacy to account for present conditions. They were true in their cycle, and applied to past conditions and states of mental development, but in this new era upon whose threshold we now stand, the vibrations become more intense. Man's whole nature is being tuned to a higher key. We must not forget that these cycles apply to the race in their effect and to the individual only as an integral part of the whole. To illustrate, the sign Aquarius is an electrical, positive, masculine influence, and will, consequently, manifest its chief activities upon the masculine qualities of the human soul, and today we have evidence of this in the gradual enfranchisement of women, arousing the positive attributes of her nature in demanding equal rights with her brother, man, in the political arena, as she has already done in the educational field. The masculine portion of the race is becoming more aggressive, mentally, asserting greater individuality, independent thought and action. The intellect of the race is being directed, however, slowly into scientific channels, while the human soul is slowly awakening to a sense of a deathless immortality and a desire for spiritual truth. It is slowly but surely shaking off the yoke of an effete priesthood and the fetters of superstition and tyranny. Intelligent man talks of the new scientific and intellectual era that has dawned upon the world, of the necessity for a new religious system based upon scientific truths, which can be demonstrated, combined with the pure spiritual essence found in all systems of religion, a religion with more spirituality and less theology, a broader charity and less dogma, and deeper love for God and man, its only creed. We must now consider the astral influence of the cycle upon the physical organism of mankind, and particularly, intelligent man talks of the new scientific and intellectual era that has dawned upon the world, of the necessity for a new religious system based upon scientific truths, which can be demonstrated, combined with the pure spiritual essence found in all systems of religion, a religion with more spirituality and less theology, a broader charity and less dogma, and deeper love for God and man, its only creed. We must now consider the astral influence of the cycle upon the physical organism of mankind, and particularly of the Western races, who are moving upon the upward arc of the cycle. It is quite evident that a radical change must take place in the physical form and constitution with the influx of more intellectual, ethereal, and spiritual vibrations. The organism must become more refined and compact, a greater degree of sensitiveness be attained, with a highly nervous system. The forerunner of this superior organism is now apparent in the numerous schools of physical culture and gymnasiums throughout the land. The many articles and pamphlets on deep rhythmic breathing disseminated among the people, and last but not least, the various schools of mental healing, etc. The masses look on and wonder while they exclaim, "What marvelous changes are coming to the world," but are utterly ignorant of the cause of the mysterious change. To the student of Hermetic philosophy, there is no mystery involved. He knows the cause, and confidently watches for the effect. Each one must seek to comprehend for himself, according to the light he may receive, basing his premises upon the true principles of astrology, carefully noting the triune aspect of planetary influence upon humanity, ever remembering that the sun and moon are the great factors in human destiny, and that his premises and conclusions must occupy the same plane. Having acquired a knowledge of the science in its application to the individual, take the broader field or universal aspect as it applies to human race, and you will find the rise and fall of nations, empires, and families marked upon the celestial dial, and in perfect accord with the influence of the sun and planets upon Mother Earth in her various movements. And last, but most important, seek with an earnest desire for truth to learn the relation of those glittering constellations of the shining zodiac to the human soul, and their influence in shaping its eternal destiny. This will reveal the whole of involution and evolution in a general sense. A faithful, earnest, and devout study of the science of the starry heavens will lead us on to other planes of thought, relating to still more interior realms of knowledge than we perhaps now dream of, and in the words of the master, a true knowledge of the stars will include a true knowledge of the soul, and we shall realize the mystical link that binds the soul to the stars. Minnie Higgin. End of Section 1. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 2 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 1. The Zodiac. To the ordinary astrologer, the zodiac is simply a band of space, 18 degrees wide, in the heavens, the center of which marks out the pathway of the sun during the space of 1 year of 365 days. The 12 signs are to him simply 30 degrees of the space. 12 times 30 equals 360, bearing the names of the constellations which once occupied them. Nay, he, as a rule, still imagines in some sense that the signs, constellations, are still there, and that the power and potency of the 12 signs is derived from the stars which occupy the zodiacal band of the skies. But this is not so, as any ordinary astronomer well knows. This single fact, i.e., the gradual shifting of the constellations, the displacement, let us say, of the starry influx from one sign to another, without any allowance being made in the astrologer's rules for any such change, has been one of the greatest obstructions to the popular spread of the art among educated minds. Argues the scientist, the fiery influence of Aries, if depending upon the stars of that constellation, ought now to be shedding forth their caloric from the sign Pisces, and Aries ought to be lumbering along with the earthy taurine nature. So also the lords of these signs ought to be changed, but that they are not can be proved by the fact that our earliest records of that dim, historic past show, equally as well as your latest textbook, that Mars is the lord of Aries, a fiery planet in a fiery sign. But astrologers still say that Pisces is watery and Aries fiery, which is not the case if the stars have any influence at all. It is not necessary, say these logical thinkers, to learn your abstruse science, if we can demonstrate that the very basis upon which your conclusions rest is in every sense fundamentally false. The scientific facts of the case are as follows. The influence of the 12 signs, as described by astrologers, is a delusion, because in all ages they are reported the same, whereas we know that every 2,160 years each sign retrogrades to the extent of 30 degrees, and as your art does not make allowance for this, it is false. For if the influence of the 12 signs does not emanate from the stars occupying the space of those signs, it must emanate from nothing. a doctrine well suited, no doubt, to musty old sages of your superstitious Chaldea, but quite out of court in our progressive age, the last decade of our cultured and scientific 19th century. So far, so good. And so the world rolls along its bright pathway in the heavens, little heeding the logical conclusions of an exact science. But to an initiate of those inner principles of our planet's constitution, all these mental conflicts have a meaning and a purpose within nature's divine economy, for it is neither wise nor expedient that the masses, with popular science in the lead, should grasp the truths which Mother Nature reserves alone for her own devoted priests. The shining zodiac, with its myriad constellations and its perfect galaxy of starry systems, derives its subtle influence, as impressed astrologically upon the human constitution, from the solar center of our solar system, not from the stars which occupy the 12 mansions of space. Aries, the fiery, and Pisces, the watery, are always there, and instead of its being an argument against astrology, it is one of its grandest truths that in all ages and in all times, Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, has been found ever the same, equally as well as Pisces, the last. In order to convey our meaning, let us digress for a moment and bring forth a fitting illustration. The condition of our atmosphere and the surrounding objects, vegetation, etc., have a peculiar condition and a magnetism wholly their own when surveyed exactly at sunrise. There is a freshness and peculiar sense of buoyancy not visible at any other time. If this state could be registered by any instrument and compared with any other set periods during the day, it would offer a remarkable contrast. 2 hours later there is a very different influence, and at noon there is a wonderful contrast. The same may be said of sunset, and again at midnight, and lastly, note the difference 2 hours before dawn. This is the coolest period of the whole 24 hours. These are facts, and yet our hearts are all beating to the same life flow, and the earth is no farther away from the parent sun, and yet it is the angle at which we, the inhabitants, receive this sun's light that makes all the difference between dawn and sunset, noon and midnight. When to these facts it is further added that it is sunrise, noon, sunset, and midnight at the same instant all the time, to some of the various different portions of the globe, it demonstrates most conclusively that the earth itself is enveloped, so to say, in a complete circle of conditions very similar to the 12 signs of the celestial zodiac. If we apply the foregoing illustration to the 12 signs of the zodiac, we shall see a perfect analogy. We shall find that when the sun reaches the celestial equator, so that it is equal day and equal night on the earth, that he is on the line of the celestial horizon. It is cosmic sunrise. Hence Aries, the fiery Azoth, begins his active influx and extends for 30 degrees, equal to 2 hours of the natural day. It is the fiery red streams of awakening life that we all manifest at sunrise. Then comes a change of magnetic polarity after the first fiery flush of cosmic life, the gleeful chattering of the birds and the crackling of the poultry. A reaction is noted. All things before active become restful and quiet. So it is with vegetation, so it is with infant life, and so it is with cosmic conditions. This corresponds with the sign Taurus. It is the solar influx, 30 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium toward the north. As this sign represents the powers of absorption, we see that as this period, vegetable and animal life is quietly absorbing, for its own use, the fiery streams of solar life. Again, we view the activity of solar influx from a different angle and change of polarity, and all things become active. It is executive force. This corresponds to the sign Gemini. It is the solar influx, 60 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium. Then comes another change of magnetic polarity. It is rest from labor. It is noon. This corresponds to Cancer. The analogy is perfect. It is the solar influx, 90 degrees removed from his point of equilibrium toward the north, and the highest point in the arc of his apparent journey and of cosmic life. It is the equilibrium of life forces. Again, the fiery influx begins its activity, and, as the hardest part of the day is about 2 hours after noon or middle of the day, so is solar influx most potent at this point in the zodiac. This corresponds to the sign Leo. It is the solar influx, removed 100 degrees from his point of equilibrium and 30 degrees toward the south, and so on month after month until the last one, Pisces, which well corresponds to the watery skies of February and the lifeless period 2 hours before dawn of a new day upon the earth, a new year to man, and a new cycle in the starry heavens. The zodiac, then, as it applies to the human constitution and the science of astrology, has its foundation in the sun, the center and source of life to the planet, and the 12 signs of the 12 great spaces of our Earth's annual orbit about her solar parent, each one typical of its month, and each month typical of its corresponding action upon our earthly conditions. As each sunrise is different in its aspects, so are no two signs of the zodiac alike. The sunrise on the 1st of March is wholly different from the sunrise upon the 1st of May. So is the beginning and ending of each sign, and the beginning and ending of each natural day, peculiar unto itself. When we reflect upon the inner laws of this action and interaction, we come nearer and nearer to the one great occult fact, viz., the divine oneness of life. We find a perfect analogy between the destiny, the life and expression of life on the earth, and the life and material destiny of embodied man. He, too, has his sunrise, the beginning of a new day of life, the seed time, the flowering season, when life wears a roseate hue, the ripening fruits of experience, his harvest time. It may be tares or golden grain, his gradual decay, the ebbing of the life forces and the icy winter of death, his gentle zephyrs and destructive hurricanes, floods and tempests, periods of drought and plenty. Within his truant constitution there are spring tides and low tides of physical, intellectual, and spiritual forces. Man also makes the annual journey about the solar center, when at the beginning of each new year to him, the life forces of his soul are renewed, regalvanized, so to say, according to the magnetic polarity of his constitution. And so every form of life has its zodiac, its orbit of life and destiny. It may be infinitesimal or vast beyond conception, each in its own peculiar plane. So we see that the whole visible universe is one vast organism, the medium of expression for the invisible, real universe, the soul and God, the great central sun, the eternal center of all life, binding the whole into unity, one life. The celestial signs of the shining zodiac have no existence to us apart from the graceful and unwearying motion of our Mother Earth. She alone makes our season, years, and destiny. And she alone, by her motion about the sun, determines the thrones and mansions of the planetary powers. The astrological zodiac of a Saturn or a Mars cannot be like ours. Their years and seasons are peculiar to themselves and their material conditions. Hence, the 12 constellations have no existence as objective facts of concrete formation or cosmic potentiality. No, but as unalterable symbols of occult truth. The starry pictures of the shining constellations have an eternal verity. They pertain to the living realities of the human soul and its varied experience. What the mysteries are and what connection they have with the 12 constellations will form the subject of our next chapter. End of section 2. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 3 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 2. The Constellations. The 12 great constellations of the zodiacal belt, which forms the Earth's orbit and the Sun's shining pathway around the celestial universe, have been considered as mere imaginary figures or emblems invented by an early primitive people to distinguish the monthly progress of the Sun and mark out, in a convenient manner, the 12 great divisions or spaces of the solar year. To this end, it is thought, the various star groups, termed constellations, were fancifully imagined to represent the various physical aspects of the month under, or into, which they were consecrated by the Sun's passage during the annual journey, so that in some sense the 12 signs or constellations were symbolical, not only of the seasons, but also of the labors of the year. That such a system seems perfectly natural to the learned mythologist, and that granting the ancients so much is a very great concession toward this childish knowledge, is, of course, quite excusable, when we are constantly told or reminded that actual science, that is to say, exact science, does not date backward more than a couple of centuries at most. Even the modern astrologer must as be descants upon the influence of the 12 signs, has but little, if any, real knowledge of this matter, above and beyond the purely physical symbolism above mentioned. And perhaps it is as well that such benighted condition prevails, and that the divine heavenly goddess is unsought and comparatively unknown. The celestial Urania, at least, in such isolation, remains pure and undefiled. She is free from the desecrating influence of polluted minds. Such, in brief outline, is the general conception of mankind regarding the shining constellations that bedeck, like fiery jewels, their maker's crown, and illumine with their celestial splendor the wondrous canopy of our midnight skies. Is there no more than a symbol of rural work in the bright radiance of the starry Andromeda, the harbinger of gentle spring? Nothing, think you, but the fruit harvest and the vintage is in the fiery, flushing luster of Antares and the ominous Scorpion. Are men so spiritually blind that they can perceive nothing but the symbol of maturing vegetation and the long summer's day in the glorious splendor of Castor and his starry mate and brother Pollux? It would indeed seem so dead is the heart and callous the spiritual understanding of our own benighted day. To the initiate of Uranus mysteries, however, these dead symbolic pictures become endowed with life. These emblems of rural labor or rustic art transform themselves from the hard chrysalistic shell and expand into the fully developed spiritual flowers of spiritual entities, revealing in their bright, radiating lines the awful mystery of the soul's genesis, its evolution, and eternal progressive destiny amid the mighty, inconceivable creations yet to come, pointing out each step and cycle in the soul's involution from its differentiation as a pure spiritual entity, a ray of divine intelligence, to the crystallization of its spiritual forces in the realms of matter, and its evolution of progressive life, the same eternal symbols of the springtime, the glorious summer, the autumn and winter of its eternal being. In making this attempt, probably the very first within the era, to convey in plain and undisguised terms the interior mysteries of the 12 constellations, the reader and student is advised to ponder deeply upon the outlines presented. The subject is too vast to present in 1 or 2 chapters. Therefore, we hope that this revolution may incite the student to further research. The real significance, the true spiritual importance of such mysteries can only be realized and fully appreciated after prolonged meditation and careful study. With this brief digression, which we consider needed advice, we will resume our task and attempt to usher our student into the weird labyrinth of Solomon's starry temple, the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. 1. Aries. First, Aries in his golden wool. This constellation represents the first divine idea, the word of the Kabbalist, and the first active manifestation of the glorious In Sof. In other words, it is mind in action, the first pulsation of deity in the dual aspects of Lord and Creator. To the human soul, it is and always typifies the unknown, invisible power, which we term intelligence, that which knows and gives unto each deific atom of life that distinguishing, universal, yet deathless force, which not only constitutes its spiritual identity and physical individuality, but enables it to pronounce in the presence of its Creator those mystic words, I am that I am. In other words, this beautiful constellation symbolizes the first pulsation of that ray of pure intelligence, which constitutes the divine ego of the human soul. It is the first that impels ever onward the life atom in its evolutionary progress, and reveals to us the beginning or first manifestation of the divine ego as an active, self-existing atom of infinite spirit within angelic spheres. Seeing the actual spiritual reality symbolized in Aries, how easy it is to note its full significance upon the external plane when refracted and reflected into the planes below through the complex action of the human organism, conveying the same radical influx in the first astrological month and the first sign of the zodiac. We can read a perfect parallel in the astral influx upon the human body, as set forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, which says, Aries symbolizes the sacrifice and represents the springtime, the beginning of a new year. The first action of pure intelligence brought forth the first expression of form, and led to the sacrifice of its angelic state, and, having gained the victory over the lower realms of matter, once more the springtime of a new life, with the promise of life, light, and love. The sign Aries represents the thinking powers of humanity. In short, the active, intellectual being, the Lord of material creation, man, and in its cosmic relations, as shown under the occult application of the 12 signs, Volume 1, we find the same perfect analogy. 2. Taurus. He, Aries, turns and wonders at the mighty bull, Taurus. The second constellation of the shining 12 represents the first reaction of spiritual conception. In other words, it is the mind's attention to its own ideas. In the Kabbalah, it represents that peculiar state of executive force whereof it is symbolically said, and the Lord saw that it was good after each act of creation. When intelligence first manifests itself, form is a matter of necessity, and, as no form can possibly exist without matter, so Taurus is the first emanation of matter in its most etherealized state. Hence it is feminine, Venus the ruler thereof, and it represents the first pure form of the human soul as it existed in its bright paradise within the angelic spheres of its parents, and reveals to us the first surprise of intelligence in embryo, the first sensation of consciousness, so to say, conscious of its divine selfhood. Hence, he, the male spirit of pure fire, Aries, glorious in his golden, solar wool, turns, expressing reaction, and wonders at the mighty bull, or material form. Thus, the first idea of pure intelligence in embryo, the result of action in Aries, becomes objective to its consciousness and is surprised at its own conception. It is the first sensation of pure, divine love within angelic realms, and it, the male spirit of pure fire, sees that it is good. Bringing this spiritual reality within our conception and comparing it with its reflected astrological influx, what a beautiful harmony we find, and yet so simple that verily we cannot refrain from once more quoting our old time worn, yet nevertheless golden law: as it is above, so it is below; as on the earth, so in the sky. Reflecting that Taurus is an earthly sign and a symbol of servitude, we see that matter is ever the servant of spirit, a necessary means for the manifestation of intelligence, again recognized in the fecundating forces of this astrological sign on every plane of its action. And it is ruled by Venus, the love element in nature, her sympathies ever finding expression in this beautiful sign. What can be clearer, more understandable than that the involved principles and deific attributes, as represented by the shining constellations, when refracted through the human organism, so complex in its constitution, reflects qualities which are the external and parallel expression of the subjective principles, and further, that form is absolutely necessary for the manifestation of intelligence. 3. Gemini. He, Taurus, bending lies with threatening bead, and calls the twins Gemini to rise. They clasp for fear and mutually embrace. This bright constellation, Castor and Pollux, Gemini, is spiritually representative of the second spiritual action. Hence, it is, of course, a masculine sign and positive. We have witnessed Act 1 of the soul's drama, and as some have said, tragedy, and in this, the third of the shining 12, we find the opening scene of Act 2, viz., the evolution of the twin souls, or more correctly, the differentiation of the divine soul into its two natural component parts, male and female. Here we approach one of the most arcane secrets within the wide scope of occult philosophy, hence must be exact and at the same time clear in our statements. Note then that after the male spirit of pure ethereal divine fire, Aries, bad conceived the first idea, and Taurus, the material envelope, had given that idea objective existence to its, the ego's, consciousness, we find sensation as the result. No sooner sensation than aspiration, longing. This closes the action and the reaction. Ever in obedience to the unsatisfied wants of an immortal soul, nature immediately responds. Hence, he bending lies with threatening head, that is demanding, and calls the twin souls to rise, to appear or evolve forth, and as a first rude shock caused by their separation, or rather by their separate existence, as two distinct yet mutually dependent forces, we have the context. They clasp for fear and mutually embrace. This most impressive scene in the soul's drama is one of profound interest and sublime beauty. In the Kabbalah, we find the same parallel, wherein it is stated, "And so God created man in his own image," the action of Aries and Taurus. In his own image, mind, created he him, male and female created he them. In other words, Aries, Taurus, and Gemini are thus spoken of in pure allegory. The mundane Bible of the Jews, like everything else esteemed sacred, finds its original and perfect expression in the great astral Bible of the skies. To the average student, the evolution of the twin souls is a profound mystery, embracing, as it does, the whole of involution and evolution, seeing that this beautiful constellation represents to us the first recognition or consciousness of the divine ego, of its dual forces, sensation and aspiration, called forth by the action of Aries and Taurus. How beautifully has the poet expressed this first pulsation of divine love. They clasp for fear, etc., evolved by the divine will of pure intelligence. They must ever remain as separate, yet mutually dependent forces, positive and negative, male and female, upon whose action and reaction rests the perfect evolvement of the powers and possibilities of the One. In order to clearly grasp the whole of these ramifications, we again invite our students' careful attention to the same sign, Gemini, in its astrological aspect, as it is representatively expressed by refraction upon the human organism. We find that this sign, the representative of the constellation always, signifies the union of reason with intuition, and that it governs the arms, hands, and executive forces of man. Surely, as we reflect upon the almost marvelous interrelationship between things spiritual and things temporal, we must conclude with the man Jesus that "they have eyes, but they see not, and ears, but alas, they hear not." If it were not so, man would, indeed, by virtue of the latent forces within him, take the kingdom of heaven by storm, and reign supreme as enthroned king of all material forms. Man, in his blindness, has relegated intuition to obscurity, has neglected the cunning of the left hand, and debauched the pure love of the divine state. Consequently, the executive forces within him are unbalanced, thus rendering him the slave of material forms, instead of being their lawful sovereign. Therefore, not until, with clean hands and pure heart, he restores intuition to her throne, united with reason, can he hope to comprehend the reality of this arcane mystery of the twin souls, Gemini. 4. Cancer. And next, the twins with an unsteady pace, bright Cancer rolls. In this beautiful constellation, we witness the reaction of Gemini, the closing scene in Act 2. Hence, it is of course a feminine force we are observing. In other words, it is that period, or rather one of them, wherein the Kabbalah expresses the reaction of the Ein Sof via his creators as, and behold, the Lord saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Just so, Cancer, spiritually interpreted, means equalizing, hence harmony, which is indeed very good, as contradistinguished from chaos. To the human soul, Cancer is the period of exalted rest. It is the highest point in the arc of the divine soul's angelic cycle. From this glorious but subjective summit or altitude in the realm of spirit, it must descend. Restless energy and the still unsatisfied longings of its own immortal nature are the forces that bring such evolution about. Having evolved the dual forces of its divine nature, the ego sees that it is good and rests from its labor. But as this exalted state is purely subjective and ideal, it must, of necessity, to satisfy the longing for further unfoldment and desire to know, descend into material realms and conditions. From this point begins the soul's involution downward until the lowest point in the arc is reached, viz., Capricorn. Refer now to the sign Cancer, and carefully study out the parallel upon its astrological planes, and also under its occult aspects, as given forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, where we read, Cancer rules the respiratory and digestive functions of humanity, and governs the reflective organs of the brain. Note the parallel. Within subjective realms, the divine soul has inspired and assimilated all that is possible to that angelic state, and knows a period of blissful rest, but the longings of its immortal nature urge on the soul. So we see that the sign Cancer symbolizes tenacity to life. To live, we must breathe and eat and assimilate upon every plane of our being. It necessarily follows that the mentality expressed by Cancer must be susceptible to inspirational currents. To inspire is to indraw. In its application, we find that this sign symbolizes love. How beautiful the harmony and contrast of the constellation and its astrological representative. 4. Leo. Then Leo shakes his mane. Herein is typified the third grand spiritual action, which, as we find throughout nature, travel in pairs. Hence, Leo is a positive, masculine constellation. Having attained the highest point in the super celestial states of subjective embryonic existence, having evolved sensation and aspiration, now inspired by a desire for immortality, the dual soul of the divine ego is once more impelled forward. But as all evolution works in spirals, it cannot ascend higher without first apparently descending lower. So ever onward in its eternal march. This beautiful constellation symbolizes the first action on the downward portion of the arc. It is the affinities of the heart, so to say, working from within to without. Matter, in its most etherealized form, begins to assert its sway. The allegorical serpent of Eden is working upon the feminine portion, symbolized by the heart, and like a magnetic tractor, the soul's affinities are drawn downward, and, as if in defiance of all responsibilities, consequences, and karma, the soul, lion-like, shakes his mane in the imperiousness of deathless courage. As we read these weird allegories written by deity in the starry vaults of heaven, the interested soul bows in reverence and awe before that almighty power we term Providence, and the profane call God. No man has altered these pure records of divinity. No finger has interpolated one single line. They are as beautifully clear to the soul now as they were in the very dawn of nature's awful creation. To the initiate into Uranus mysteries, it is unnecessary to draw a parallel between the constellation and its astrological sign. They are too clear, magnificent, and impressive to escape notice. To the majority of students, the resemblance may not be so apparent. Hence, for their benefit, we will point out a few aspects of this interesting parallel. We read that the sign Leo is the solar lion of the mysteries, that ripens with his own internal heart the fruits brought forth from the earth by the moisture of Isis, the soul. Just so, the divine ego, by its eternal energy and strength, the pure fire of intelligence, externalizes through material forms the principles involved in the downward portion of the arc, as qualities and attributes of the soul, reflected in the physical man as traits and qualities. Again, we are told, this sign reveals to us the ancient sacrifice and the laws of its compensation. In the imperiousness of a deathless courage, the soul defies all consequences and responsibilities. Surely, this is the supreme sacrifice, to leave its pure Edenic state to gain knowledge, to evolve its latent forces, and from this lion of the tribe of Judah is born that divine love and sympathy, which ultimately redeems and purifies the soul and saves it from death in matter. The laws of its compensation are fulfilled in the perfected man. In its intellectual aspect, we learn that the mental forces of those dominated by this sign are ever striving to attain unto some higher state. Their ideas are grand compared with the nature of the constellation and all that it implies. The reflection is clear, natural, and beautiful. When we reflect upon this awful period in the involution of the dual souls of the divine ego, as symbolized by the constellation, and the grand truths represented by the astrological sign, when refracted through the human organism, the reason for Leo being named the royal sign becomes quite plain. 6. Virgo. And following, Virgo calms his rage again. Beautifully expressive are these lines to those who read their mystic import aright. Virgo is the reaction of the leonine force and is, consequently, a feminine symbol. Action and reaction are the eternal laws upon which the cosmos is founded. They constitute the inseparable affinities, attraction, and repulsion of everything within the realm of manifested being. In this mystic constellation, we see the first ideas of maternal instinct arise. This is a necessary result of the impulsive action of the heart in Leo, the reaction from a state of imperious defiance. The heat of rage or energy and deathless courage results in the ideas of something to be encountered, overcome, and of self-preservation. The dual soul descends still another volve in the spiral of its celestial journey toward crystallized forms. Virgo, the virgin of the skies and eternal symbol of that divine, immaculate conception, shows wherein these forces lie. Here is conceived in a pure, holy sense the first instinct of love within the dual soul. It represents that awful period in the biblical Garden of Eden, wherein the virgin wife stands before the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where she is fascinated by the allurements of matter, and is unconsciously becoming enveloped in the coils of the serpent. In other words, after the cosmic force had shaken its mane in defiance of material forces, it is the reaction of his subjective half, which sees how good material things are, or, in other words, and following Virgo, calms his rage again. The masculine half, or positive force of the soul, yields to temptation and is soothed by the alluring prospects. It will be noticed in this connection that pity, reflection, and compassion are the peculiar actions of the sign Virgo in the zodiac, not the constellation, and that astrologically it governs the bowels. This symbolism is really very beautiful when closely compared and studied. That immaculate conception of pure love of the soul for its other half upon the astrological plane becomes refracted and reacts as compassion and pity. Again, the soul, within subjective realms, sees how good material things are, and its refraction represents the assimilating functions of the human organism. It also reveals to us the significance of the Lord's Supper. At this stage of its journey, the divine ego knows for the last time that close communion with the twin soul before the crucifixion, the wine typical of the sacrifice, the bread, and the sustaining forces of its own immortal being. The intellectual aspect of the sign Virgo forms a perfect analogy to the constellation and is too evident for further remarks. 7. Libra. Then day and night are weighed in Libra's scales, equal a while, at last the night prevails. Another volve in the spiral, and we reach the grand climax of the soul's journey within the spiritual world. The nature of this constellation was, for ages, concealed from all but initiates, for the reason that it contains the most important mysteries connected with the human soul. It is the grand transition and between the spiritual world and the astral world. In other words, between ideal conceptions and elemental forms, between the world of design and the realms of force. One of the chief mysteries of Libra is that it is androgyny, or bisexual in nature. So far, the dual soul has evolved within the realms of spirituality. Here it stands in the celestial balance between the two, giving way to temptation, takes the forbidden fruit, and instantly awakes from its purely spiritual state to become surrounded by the illusions of matter. The struggle of the soul with the attracting forces of matter is very clearly expressed in the line, equal a while, at last the night prevails. In other words, astral and physical darkness bedim the soul's spiritual sight, and leaving the realms of innocence and bliss, they sink into the vortex of the great astral world. The celestial state is now forever lost as a realm of angelic innocence. It can only be regained amid trial, sorrow, suffering, and experience, and when regained, it is as Lord and Master, not as the innocent cherub. But when, having gained or reached the equator of the upward arc of its progress, and, united once more to its missing half, gives expression to that deathless force with which it started from the opposite point, Aries, I am that I am, no longer an embryo, but being within the universal soul of being. Before closing this symbolic constellation, we must reveal the mystery of its bisexual nature. In the higher or first portion of the sign, it is positive to some extent and masculine. The soul is still within the Garden of Eden and pure, clad in the raiment of God, and is represented by the Chaldean statues of the bearded Venus, or Venus, the angel of Libra, as a morning star, bright Lucifer. But in the latter half, after the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, positive and negative, you see, has been partaken of, bright Lucifer falls. The son of the morning, shorn of his glory, becomes the symbol of night or vesper, the evening star, and the symbol is thus, and the soul loses its heavenly raiment, or spiritual consciousness, and becomes clothed with matter, the symbol of night. The sign Libra in the zodiac, in its astrological aspect, is a very external correspondence of all the foregoing. 8. Scorpio. And longer grown, the heavier scale inclines and draws bright Scorpio from the winter signs. We now behold the gates of paradise guarded by the flaming sword, which points to the four quarters of the world. This sword is, according to Genesis, to guard the way of the tree of life, and such, esoterically, it really is. The soul is no longer dual, but separated into male and female personalities, and behold, they see that they are naked. Stripped of their spiritual raiment, they feel the chill of matter and the lusts of an animal nature. They need clothing, so God made them coats of skin. Sex is the symbolism herein typified, and the evolution of the animal passions of procreation, of multiplication and evolution. It is the complete entry of the soul into elemental conditions, and the flaming sword guarding the four quarters of the earth to the way of life are the four general realms of the astral world. The way to physical life in concrete forms, and the way to life eternal through the realms of the sylphs, gnomes, undines, and salamanders. They are the basis of all matter, known as air, earth, water, and fire. Here we see that through the evolution of sex and its accompanying desire for procreation, these blind forces of nature find their avenue of expression. Spiritual consciousness almost lost, and without reason, the soul becomes the prey, so to say, of these forces of the astral world, which is the realm of design. The soul's creations must be met and vanquished upon the upward arc of the cycle of progress. They guard or oppose the way to eternal life. Here the soul, having gained the victory, stripped forever of its earthly raiment and the lusts of the flesh, arrayed once more in its spiritual raiment, purified and sanctified, it will stand once more at the gates of paradise, where, reunited with its missing half, it will partake of the fruit of the tree of life and become as gods. Astrologically, the correspondence is perfect, and so thinly disguised as to need no explanation. 9. Sagittarius. Him Centaur follows with an aiming eye. his bow full drawn and ready to let fly. Deeper and deeper sinks the soul into material forms. The evolution of sex has produced the necessary avenues for the entrance of countless forces, and the soul is now rapidly losing the last vestiges of its spiritual conscience. In other words, Sagittarius symbolizes that state of the soul wherein it is descending to its polarizing point, and is, therefore, the vortex of innumerable opposing forces, seeking expression in different forms. It is the bow, strength or force of the soul, full drawn and ready to let fly its arrows of energy in any direction that may afford proper opportunity. Here we see the expression of that deathless, fiery force and imperious daring and courage within more material states, the primal fire reflected from another angle. But everything is unsettled. It is a masculine force and restless, and is represented under the allegory of the Tower of Babel and the utter dispersion of the people, entities to the four corners of the earth, and finally becomes involved in dense matter, and its migrations are at an end on this side of the cycle of necessity. Upon the astrological plane, the zodiacal sign Sagittarius rules the motive forces and the pedestrian instinct, the thighs, or basis of locomotion. Hence, we see, even here, a most perfect analogy. This sign symbolizes also the governing forces of humanity, which see the necessity of law and order, hence government. In this expression, we find the bow, strength or force, ready to let fly its arrows of energy in any direction the opportunity may afford. When refracted upon the human organism and reflected upon the external plane, these forces manifest as the restless spirit that ever impels onward, seeking new fields of expression, out of which develops a sense of order, restraining and training, or the governing of self and control of others. When we reflect upon these symbols of starry truths, the mind bows in reverence before the wisdom that created them. 10. Capricorn. Neck's narrow horns the twisted caper shows. The goat, and in the realms of spirit, the crystallized mineral, is the reaction of the former, and shows to us death, inertia, and rest. Hence, Kronos, or Saturn, the symbol of death, is lord of this state and condition. It is the polarizing point of the soul's evolution in matter, and therefore forms the lowest arc in the cycle of necessity. Herein we behold the soul imprisoned within the mineral state. The fire of the flint and the spark in the crystal are the only avenues of its lonesome expressions. But as the lowest point, it is also the promise of a higher, and the symbol of a higher state, and the symbol of another spiral in its endless life. This constellation, as the symbol of inertia and death, is also the symbol of awakening life, and prepares the soul for the most perfect expression of its powers in its forthcoming upward journey. If we pause for a moment and consider the force and power necessary to evolve out of this dark, dense mineral realm, the foregoing sentence will become clear and forcible. Hitherto, the soul has been slowly drawn down into coils of matter, imprisoned by material forces. It has penetrated the lower depths and can go no farther. Rest here is to gather strength, force. Mark well the differences and parallel between Cancer and Capricorn, opposite points in the arc. Cancer is the symbol of exalted rest within angelic realms, Capricorn the symbol of rest in dense matter. From the former state, the soul is impelled forward on its downward journey. From the latter state, the soul awakens to the struggle for life on the upward arc, and must now give expression to the positive powers of its immortal being, which have become involved in material form, that shall make it the master and give it the victory over death and material forces. Surely this is truly the promise of a new day and higher state of existence. It will be instructive to study this by a comparison of the zodiacal sign Capricorn as set forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, wherein we read, "This sign signifies the knees, and represents the first principle in the trinity of locomotion, viz., the joints, bending, pliable, movable." It will be instructive to study this by a comparison of the zodiacal sign Capricorn as set forth in the Light of Egypt, Volume 1, wherein we read, "This sign signifies the knees, and represents the first principle in the trinity of locomotion, viz., the joints, bending, pliable, movable." The analogy is perfect. The soul, which has been pliant, bending to material forces, now reverses this action and bows the knee in awe and reverence to the higher powers of its being. When refracted upon the human organism, we find that the cold, lonesome state and weary struggle within the mineral realm becomes love of self, directing its energies to the attainment of selfish ends. What could be more natural? 11. Aquarius. And from Aquarius earn a flood or flows. The soul, released from its crystallized cycle of matter, now rapidly evolves into states, though material, yet entirely different. Its previous arc, from Libra to Capricorn, has been amid inorganic matter. It is now rushing with lightning speed upon its weird, toilsome upward journey through purely organic forms, from vegetable to animal, and as all organic forms have their primary origin in water, so does this celestial urn express the primary conception of this physical state. Further, to more fully express this, Aquarius is typical of man as prototype of the last grand goal of the soul's future material state. In other words, the last quadrant of the four elements, viz., bull, lion, eagle, man. There is something exceedingly significant in all this, and the more we ponder on this spiritual allegory of the shining constellation, the more we are impressed with the divine wisdom of those early instructors of our race, who thus preserved truth in an incorruptible form. From this weird but beautiful constellation, we learn how the soul has progressed, finding innumerable avenues of expression of its latent forces, the manifestation of its powers in the various chemical changes and development of functions expressed through countless forms on the lower planes of existence, the sacrifice of its angelic innocence, the imperious defiance and deathless courage symbolized by Leo, have obtained the victory over the lower kingdoms, which will be incorporated into his vast empire. Yet, unstable as water, it cannot excel, or in other words, cannot rise to a higher state within this arc of its progressive life. We find that the astrological expression of this constellation, the sign Aquarius, governs the legs and is the natural emblem of the changeable, movable, migratory forces of the body, forming a perfect parallel with its interior symbol. There is a great deal contained in the zodiacal sign worthy of deep study and reflection. 12. Pisces. Near their loved waves, cold Pisces take their seat, with Aries join and make the round complete. Once more a reaction, the last scene of the soul's impersonal drama. The constellation, if Pisces is the symbol of rest and expectation, the soul has now completed the first round or rung in the cycle of necessity, and its next state is that of incarnated man. It has triumphed over every sphere below, and defied, in turn, every power above, and is now within that sixth state of the embryonic soul world that transforms all its past knowledge, sorrow, and suffering into experience and produces the impersonal man. It has traveled through constellated states within matter and spirit, and as a human soul with reason, intuition, and responsibility, it will, in its next state, become subject to those same powers when reflected from a different plane. The 12 constellations of its soul will manifest a complete rapport with the 12 signs of solar light and power. With this we close. The mystic sign of this constellation is, or completion, a seal and a sign of its past labors. And, as we have seen, the shining constellations are the soul's progressive history from its genesis to its appearance within embodied conditions as man, and so, by correspondence, are the 12 solar signs symbols of man and his material destiny. The foundation has been laid, the material and resources are at hand, for his kingdom is exclusive. With his own hands he must build his temple, the symbol of the perfected man. Each stone accurately measured, cut, polished, and in its proper place. The proportions asymmetrical, hence harmonious. The keystone of whose arch is will, its foundation love. This accomplished, he will have completed the second round of the great cycle of necessity. And who, after contemplating the wondrous harmony of this beautiful system, and the complete accord of each part, can refuse to agree with the truly inspired Addison, that ever moving as they shine, the hand that made us is divine. End of section 3. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 4 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 3. The Spiritual Interpretation of the 12 Houses of the Horoscope. As a sequel to the foregoing subjects, viz., the zodiac and constellations, we will add the spiritual interpretation of the 12 houses of a horoscope, which completes the truant expression of these celestial symbols of eternal truths. In revealing the mystery, we would impress upon the mind of the student that the order of the zodiac is the reverse of the external in its spiritual application to the 12 houses of the horoscope. As the 4 cardinal signs, viz., Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, correspond to the 4 angles of a natal figure, it is our purpose to explain first the symbology of the 4 angles or cardinal points, believing the whole revelation will thus become clear and forcible. The 4 angles of the horoscope correspond to the 4 elements, the 4 triplicities, and the 4 cardinal points, or epochs, in the soul's involution from pure spirit to the crystallizing inert mineral state. The first angle is the ascendant, or house of life. It is the eastern horizon and symbolized by Aries. Upon the interior, this first angle stands for the birth, or differentiation of the divine ego as the result of the creative action or impulse of the deific mind. The ego rises upon the eastern horizon of celestial states, a glowing, scintillating atom of pure intelligence, an absolute eternal ego rising out of the ocean of infinite love. The south angle, meridian, or 10th house, pertaining to honor, etc., is symbolized by Cancer, the highest point in the arc of the soul's involution, as a differentiated atom of deity within angelic spheres. Having evolved the first dual expression of its, the ego's self, The twin souls, sensation and aspiration, or love and wisdom. The ego rests a while, radiant with celestial love and wisdom, and inspiring the divine breath of life. Again, the restless impulse of the creative purpose arouses the ego to further action. The culminating point has been reached, and now must begin an apparent downward course toward the western horizon. The seventh angle, or house of marriage, is represented by Libra, the balance, or point of equilibrium, where the two souls are still one, balanced upon the western horizon. The alluring temptations of material illusions draw the souls downward, and, divorced from their celestial state, the radiance of divine love becomes obscured, until the twilight of consciousness of that former state is lost in the night of material conditions. This house signifies also law and open enemies, and Libra, justice. Sex is the law. The antagonism is surely too apparent to require explanation. The fourth angle, or nadir, the point opposite the MC, signifies the frozen north, and is symbolized by Capricorn, the crystallizing point in the soul's involution. It is death, inertia, that is crystallization of the soul's spiritual forces. It is the lowest point of the arc in the monad's downward journey. It is the night before the awakening of a new day upon a higher plane of existence. The remaining houses are the lights and shadows that fill out and complete the picture. Upon this, the first round of the cyclic ladder. The 12th house, symbolized by Taurus, represents the first expression of form of the human soul. It is matter in the most etherealized state. It is the trail of the serpent, the silent, secret, tenacious, negative principle that ultimately draws the soul down into the vortexes of gross matter and death. The 11th, or house of friends, whose symbol is Gemini, the twins, expressive of the first emanation of this sublime relationship, the dual attributes, love and wisdom, closest friends. It is sensation and aspiration which enable the spirit to attain to the exalted state indicated by the 10th mansion. The 9th mansion of the celestial map is the house of science, art, religion, philosophy, etc., and its symbol is Leo, the heart with its emotions, love and longings and sympathies. Having evolved the twins and inspiring the divine breath of wisdom, glowing with deific love, the ego aspires to know, and all the sympathies of the soul are aroused. Dauntless and fearless, defying all opposition and consequences. The ego, is ready to sacrifice this angelic state and explore the boundless universe in pursuit of knowledge, and goes forth on its long voyage upon the ocean of infinite, fathomless love and wisdom. The 8th, or house of death and legacies, is symbolized by Virgo, the virgin wife, standing before the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Fascinated by the flattering prospects of greater power and wisdom, desire and sympathy draw the soul down into realms which lead to death and the beginning of a heritage of sorrow. The 6th, or house of sickness, menials and sorrow, is symbolized by Scorpio. The fall from Libra through Scorpio, sex, created the first condition of what we recognize as sickness and affliction. It is evident that this house is related to the elementals of the astral plane, which become the servitors of man. The 5th, or house of children, etc., symbolized by Sagittarius, signifies the offspring of sex, Scorpio, entities sent forth to people the earth to take their chances of life, speculating on its future course, fearlessly eager for the struggle, gaining pleasure in its migrations and activities. The 3rd house is symbolized by Aquarius. This is the first step of the upward journey or evolution from the inert mineral state. The changes are now rapid. The journeys innumerable, through mineral, vegetable, and animal planes of existence. Here the soul monad brings into actual practice the knowledge gained on its long voyage. The magical powers of the soul are brought into action to effect these changes in form and function, conquering material forces and planes of life, transmuting nature's elements to its uses and purposes, and writing its history as it journeys ever onward, step by step. And further, this house stands in opposition to the ninth house, symbolized by Leo, longing to expand its, the ego's, possibilities through trial and suffering, gaining knowledge through bitter experience, yet fearlessly braving all things, guided and sustained by the imperial will of spirit. The recompense promised by that supreme sacrifice has been won in Aquarius, the man, consecrated now to a higher existence, baptized in the waters of affliction, experience, ready to be transmuted into actual knowledge. This is Aquarius and the third house. The second house, signified as Pisces, the house of wealth, that which has been accumulated on the long and toilsome journey, the wealth of experience acquired through trials and struggles, and now with higher, greater possibilities, the soul eagerly awaits the hour when it shall be born again a conscious, responsible human being to begin the second round of the cyclic ladder. On this second round, to externalize the knowledge gained, to evolve the involved attributes and forces of being, a creature of will and intellect to work out its destiny as the Lord of material creation. Observe the order of the zodiac is reversed upon the external human plane. But Aries is always symbolic of the first angle, and Libra of the seventh, being the point of equilibrium, while the 10th or south angle becomes Capricorn and the fourth Cancer. The mission of the soul now is to evolve the positive, spiritual attributes. Aries rules the brain and the fiery imperial will. It signifies courage, daring, etc., the first qualities necessary for the battle of life. Ruling the head, the sign and house show us the ability of man to view the field of action, to mark his chart and arm for the war, which will be incessant. Responsible for his acts, a creature of unfolding consciousness, an individual whose measure of free will enables him to wander so far north or south of his celestial equator within his orbit or zodiac. The south angle or 10th house, now ruled by Capricorn, tells of the honor, position, fame, etc., or the reverse, acquired by patient labor. The crystallized material gains, the concrete result of ambition, skill, and talent, which will, at the close of his earthly career, become liquefied by the universal resolvent, symbolized by Cancer upon the opposite angle, symbolical of the grave, the end of mundane affairs, when they will be mirrored forth in new forms in that great white sea, according to the manner in which he gained his worldly accumulations and prestige. The seventh angle is Libra, house of marriage, that all-important relation which may make or mar a life. The balance is so easily disturbed in its equilibrium. To preserve its harmony, equality must reign, blending love and wisdom. It is the perfect poise of body, mind, and soul, achieved by loving obedience to the higher laws of our being and the true union of intuition and reason. The second house, now represented by Taurus, shows us that personal wealth and possessions must come through patient servitude, steady application, and diligence in being able to choose and assimilate the knowledge that will enable man to battle with material conditions and wrest from the abundant sources of Mother Nature his share of treasure and experience. It is the battleground to which humanity, armed with brain and will, life and energy, goes forth to battle with material forces for the bread he must earn by the sweat of his brow, and through the silent, subtle forces of mind and soul conquer matter, thus storing up a wealth of knowledge and experience. The third house is ruled by Gemini, the twins, reason and intuition. the brethren who aid and guide us on our many journeys in the pursuit of knowledge. As this sign governs the hands and arms and the executive forces of humanity, we see that the hands become the magical agents of mind, molding into outward form the ideas conceived in the mind, projecting these into the field of active life, that he may write a bright record in the book of life. The hands should be kept clean, the images pure, and the perfect poise gained by the equal exercise of love and wisdom, intuition and reason, making the basis of education, the evolution of the interior or real self. This is the true meaning of this house upon the external plane. It is occult because it means projecting the powers of the soul into conscious life, externalizing the qualities and magical forces of spirit, as shown in the first instance by Aquarius. This can be accomplished only through pure desire and aspiration. Otherwise, the unbalanced scales with floods and cataclysms will be the results. The fifth house, ruling children, etc., is symbolized by Leo, the heart. The joys and sorrows that offspring of every kind bring, all belong to this house of the heart. The sacrifice indicated is too obvious for comment. The sixth house governs sickness, disease, etc., and its symbol is Virgo, an earthy sign, clearly showing us that the material form is the matrix, out of which are born disease and suffering. But the perfect assimilation of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, transmuting the trials, experiences, sorrows, and suffering of the physical and external life into true wisdom, makes man master of his material universe, and the blind forces of nature become his servants. Having accomplished the task, and attained the harmonious poise or balance in Libra, the individualized soul arrives at the eighth step in the journey. The eighth house, or house of death and legacies, Scorpio. The old Adam dies. The sensuous has no place in the balanced, harmonious being, but recognizes sex as the law, the door to regeneration now, and that a new legacy is awaiting him. The ninth house, Sagittarius, where, with the knowledge acquired, self sits in judgment upon the works of the hands and mind, whether or not they have been well done, the sacrifice of the lower nature properly made, control of the true being established, the transmutations correct and accurate, assimilation perfect and free from dross, harmony gained by loving obedience to the higher law of being, and thus becomes ruler of his kingdom. The long journey almost accomplished, so far as earth is concerned, perceiving and understanding that all sciences, philosophies, and religions have their origin from one primal source. Having penetrated the depths in reverent obedience to the divine law of creation, and evolved the attributes of the dual constitution, the forces of his being become crystallized. He has reached the culmination of his earthly pilgrimage, and stands forth the perfected human reflection of the higher self. The 11th house is represented by Aquarius on the human plane. Friends surround and welcome him. These friends are the pure thoughts, noble impulses, lofty ideals, and generous deeds. The bread cast upon the waters of life returns to nourish and sustain him in his encounter with the secret foes, symbolized by the 12th house and Pisces. The idols, false ideas, and vampires of his own creation are to be cleansed and washed away by the waters of love, the universal solvent that is ever seeking to bring about change and new forms, born again of water, to make the round of the astral zodiac, until, having again reached the equator of the ascending arc, where he is reunited to the missing half of his soul, the true friend of the Edenic state, the highest point in the arc of human progress won, the honor and glory of a perfected soul, the Lord and Master, the I am that I am, to rest in peace in the heart of infinite love and wisdom. End of section 4. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 5 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. By Thomas Burgone. Chapter 4. Astrotheology. There is one species of divine revelation which has not and cannot be tampered with, one great Bible, which forms the starry original of all Bibles. This sacred Bible is the great astral Bible of the skies. Its chapters are the 12 great signs. Its pages are the innumerable glittering constellations of the heavenly vault, and its characters are the personified ideals of the radiant sun, the silvery moon, and the shining planets of our solar sphere. There are 3 different aspects of this sacred book, and in each aspect the same characters appear, but in different roles, their dress and natural surroundings being suited to the natural play of their symbolic parts. In fact, the whole imagery may be likened unto a play, or rather a series of plays performed by the same company of artists. It may be a comedy, or it may be melodrama, or it may be a tragedy, but the principles behind the scenes are ever the same and show forth the same divine oneness of nature, demonstrating the eternal axiom: one truth, one life, one principle, and one word, and in their fourfold expression is the 4 great chapters of the celestial book of the starry heavens. In this aspect, the visible cosmos may be represented as a kaleidoscope. The visible constellations, planets, and other heavenly bodies are the bits of colored glass, and Deity, the invisible force, which keeps the instrument in motion. Each revolution produces a different pictorial figure, which, complete in its harmony of parts, is perfect in its mathematical proportions, and beautiful in its geometrical designs. And yet each creation, each form, and each combination of forms are produced by the same little pieces of glass, and all of them, in reality, are optical illusions, i.e., natural phenomena, which deceive the physical senses. So it is with cosmic nature. It must not, however, be supposed, because of this perfect and continual illusion of nature's playful phenomena, that all visible creation is purely an illusion of the senses, as some cranky metaphysicians would have it, because this is not so. Going back again to our kaleidoscope, we can clearly see that without it and its tainted beads, no such optical illusion is possible. There is, then, a basis of spiritual reality to all visible physical phenomena, but this basis lies concealed because of the perfect illusion which the reflected image produces upon the material plane of the physical senses. The beads themselves are real. These are the basis, and the different pictures are the result, not of the beads, but of the angle from which they are reflected to our earthly vision. In other words, the plane from which we behold the phenomena. Hence, the nearer we approach the divine center of our being, the less complicated nature's original designs become, and the farther we are removed from the central source, the more weird, mysterious, complicated, and incomprehensible does Mother Nature appear to the finite human mind, and this is especially so to man's theological instinct, his religiosity, that constitutes one of the fundamental factors of his being. Nature is ever one in her original truths, and their duplicate reflections, but ever conflicting and contradictory in her multiplied refractions through the minds of men. Therefore, we will present the primary concept of that grand astrotheology formulated by man's great progenitors, and view the simple machinery by which they typified to the primitive mind a general outline of nature's divine providence. All sacred books begin with an account of physical creation, the culmination of which is the appearance of men and women, as the parents of the race, and why they will differ considerably in detail and makeup, the basic ideas embodied are essentially the same in all cosmogenesis, so that in the Jewish Bible, accessible to all, one can read the primitive story of creation from a Jewish point of view, and when read, rest satisfied that he has read the revelation vouchsafed to man in every age and in every clime. The only difference is one of mental peculiarity and national custom, along with climatic conditions. Hindu, Chaldean, Chinese, Persian, Egyptian, Scandinavian, Druidic, and ancient Mexican are all the same, different names and drapery to suit the people only, but essentially the same in the fundamental ideas conveyed. The creation of the world. The simple story of creation begins at midnight, when the sun has reached the lowest point in the arc, Capricorn. All nature then is in a state of coma. In the northern hemisphere, it is winter time. Solar light and heat are their lowest ebb, and the various appearances of motion, etc., are the sun's passage from Capricorn to Pisces, 60 degrees, and from Pisces to Aries, 30 degrees, making 90 degrees or one quadrant of the circle. Then begin in real earnest the creative powers. It is springtime. The 6 days are the 6 signs of the northern arc, beginning with the disruptive fires of Aries, then in their order: Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, then Libra, the 7th day and the 7th sign, whose first point is opposite Aries and is the opposite point of the sphere, the point of equilibrium, equal day and equal night. It is autumn. It is the 6th sign from Aries, the first creative action, and so the 6th day followed the fiery force wherein God created the bisexual man. See Genesis 1:5 through 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. It is the 7th, or day of the Lord, man, the climax of material creation and Lord of all living things, and B rests in the blissful Garden of Eden. This 7th day and 7th sign is the concealed sacred Libra, the perfect union of the sexes. Then comes the fall from Libra through Scorpio, and banishment from the Garden of Eden. That is the victory of Satan, or winter, over summer. It is useless to repeat the same old story. The yearly journey of the sun around the constellated dial of deity is the astro basis of all primitive cosmology. The scheme of redemption. In addition to the creation of the world and the fall of man through sin, we find all people in possession of a grand scheme of redemption, and, like the former, we shall find them all essentially the same. They all require a mediator between the angry God and disobedient man, and they all require that this mediator shall be divine or semi-divine. Nothing less can satisfy deity's demands, or rather, let us say man's own carnal imagination. It is simply another turn of our cosmic kaleidoscope, and behold, the actors have changed. Capricorn becomes the stable of the goat, in the manger of which the young Savior of the world is born. As a type of all, we will take the gospel Savior. It is again midnight. The sun enters the sign Capricorn on the 21st of December. This is the lowest point of the arc, south, and for 3 days he is stationary or in darkness. And now it is Christmas Eve. He, the sun or Savior, begins to move, and at midnight is born as the celestial Virgo is rising upon the eastern quadrant of the skies. Hence, the sun god is born of a virgin. Then comes the flight to escape Kronos, or Saturn, ruling Capricorn, who kills the young babes. There is a period of silence in the god's history while the sun is in transit through the signs Capricorn and part of Aquarius. That is, he is hidden or obscured by the clouded skies of this period. We hear of him but once again until he, the sun god or Savior, is 30 years old, or has transited 30 degrees of space. He has entered the sign Aquarius, symbolical of the man. Now begins the period of miracles. Let us digress for a space, and refer to our chapter on the constellations. We shall find a perfect analogy between this miracle working period and the constellations, Aquarius and Pisces, as therein given. The first miracle we read of is turning water into wine. This may be seen in a threefold aspect. The sun god changes by his life forces the waters of winter into the rich vintage of the harvest, where the Virgin, Virgo, Mother, again appears. Again, the wine becomes the blood, the life offered up on the vernal cross to strengthen, renew, and make merry with new life our earth and its people. The devil, or winter, with his powers of darkness, is defeated and man saved. The final triumph is the crucifixion in Aries, the vernal equinox about the 21st of March, quickly followed by the resurrection or renewal of life. Then the God rises into heaven to sit upon the throne at the summer solstice to bless his people. And we read that the Savior of mankind was crucified between two thieves. Very good. The equinoctial point is the dividing line between light and darkness, winter and summer. In other words, the sun is resuming his northern arc to replenish the earth with his solar face and preserve his people from death in the coming winter. The life of a Buddha, a Krishna, or a Christ are all found in their completeness in the life of Horus, while the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are Isis, Horus, and Osiris. The same Trinity, under different names, are found in all nations. It is the sun, moon, and human soul, which is the only true mediator of man. There is another version of this celestial crucifixion, wherein the sun god Savior, after the supper of the harvest in Virgo, is crucified at the autumnal equinox upon the equator. We read that he was dying from the 6th to the 9th hours, 3 hours, 3 signs, or from the 21st of September to the 21st of December, when he is laid in the tomb. This is the lowest point of the sun's journey in the southern hemisphere, and darkness holds the balance in our northern hemisphere. The 3 days in the tomb are the 3 months, or 3 signs, before the vernal equinox, or the resurrection, the rising out of the south to bring salvation to the northern portion of our earth. We have now only to glance over various diverging lines of the same cosmology and the same redemption. All these allegories typified truths. They all teach the initiate the mysteries of creation, of man's destiny, and his necessary cycle of material probation. Some of the most beautiful parables may be read in this light. Abraham and the story of his wanderings in the deserts of Asia Minor, of Lot and his unfaithful wife, are to be seen still written in the heavens. Hagar and Ishmael are still there. So also are Esau and his brother Jacob, the story of Joseph and his brethren, of Samson and his 12 labors. This is the same beautiful story. The sun, shorn of his glory or solar force at the autumnal equinox, stands upon the equator between the 2 pillars of the temple, or light and darkness, and pulls down the temple, or signs, into the southern hemisphere. And behind this we have the eternal truth of the soul, when, giving way to the allurements of matter, Delilah, the soul is shorn of its spiritual covering, or conscience, and sinks into matter and death. And the story of David and Goliath can be read today as clearly as of yore. They are eternal, spiritual verities of human nature, and record not only the history of the human race, its mutations and transmutations, but of the individual man and the suffering and delusive joys of his material life. Aye, more. It is the record of all his past existence and a type of his eternal destiny in the future. Another turn of our cosmic kaleidoscope, and lo, the scene changes, the play extended, the angles greater, caused by the revolution of our solar parent through his celestial zodiac. As the sun passes out of one sign into another, or, in other words, forms a different angle to his own center of force, a new dispensation is born to the world. or rather reborn under a new guise. The great Sun God appears to change his nature and manifests an entirely different set of attributes. That is the way man personified this play of nature through his imperfect conception of the cause of this change. But to him it was and is a truth, and man's effort to externalize these attributes in a divine personality was and is strictly from the plane of his mental development and spiritual unfoldment. The two pictures of this astro-theology, as set forth in the two divisions of the Jewish Bible, will illustrate our meaning. The sun had entered the sign Aries sometime prior to the exodus from Egypt. Aries is the constellation of Mars, the fiery, destructive, and warrior element or force in nature, and we find the Jewish conception of God a perfect embodiment of these attributes. The Lord of hosts, a God mighty in battle, delighting in the shedding of blood and the smell of burnt offerings, ever marshaling the people to battle and destroying their foes and the works of his own hands, a God imbued with jealousy, anger, and revenge. This was the type set up by the Jewish savior and lawgiver Moses. After a period of 2,160 years, we find the Christian cosmology ushered in. The sun has entered the sign Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter, the beneficent father. The Christ, or mediator of the Christian gospel, was an embodiment of the joint qualities of the sign and ruling planet. Gentle, loving, and merciful, his words were messages of love and peace. His work was with the poor, oppressed, and fallen. He eschewed sacrifices and burnt offerings. A contrite heart was the best offering. He taught the people that God was their Father, loving all, just, yet merciful. But a strong taint of the old conception has remained with the human race, hiding at times the beauty of the latter concept. These are, again, the refractions of eternal truths, viewed by man from his material plane. The elements are here presented, the alphabet and its key clearly defined. Therefore, let each one explore this tangled labyrinth of astro-theology for him or herself, and work out the various correspondences at leisure. It is enough to indicate the starry originals of all this seemingly confused mass of so-called divine revelation in sacred books. They, one and all, pertain to the same celestial phenomena, and the various Bibles are the outcome of man's serious attempt to tabulate and externalize this heavenly order, to record his conceptions of these starry aspects and movements with their corresponding effects upon the earth. Probably the purest system to us is that which may yet be derived from Chaldean sources. This sacerdotal caste were the most perfect in their astral conceptions and complete in their symbolic system of recording. And if the great work found in King Sargon's library in 70 tablets is ever translated, it will prove of priceless value to the student of these weird but sublime astrological mysteries. In conclusion, as we reflect upon the fourfold aspect of the subject that we have presented in outline in these pages, the whole imagery passes in review before the mental vision. We see that the radiant constellations of the heavenly vault, with the beautiful reflection and counterpart, the shining zodiac, are the two halves of the great cycle of necessity, the spiral of eternal universal life, which binds the whole into unity and unity into infinity. It is the grand scheme of creative life. The seven principles of nature, or divine activities, are the forces producing the phenomena within seven angelic states, seven kingdoms, and by seven planets upon the external plane, the planets being the passive mediums of the positive spiritual forces. Upon this dual spiral, which reflects the seven rays of the solar spectrum, is produced seven musical notes, one half of the spiral in sound and color being the complementary of the other half. Man, the earth, and our solar system are revolving, each orb in its own key and its own peculiar ray, meeting and blending with other spirals, and the whole blending into one mighty spiral cycle of progressive life, revolving around the eternal, infinite ego God, ever involving and evolving the attributes, powers, and possibilities of the one great central source of being. It is a grand orchestra, pealing out in richest melody and sublime harmony the grand anthem of creation. We praise thee, O God. End of section 5. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 6 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 5. Astromythology. The astromythology system of the ancients, though forming the last section, so to say, of the mysteries of the divine Urania, is perhaps the most beautiful of its general features, and perfect in the complete fulfillment of the purpose for which it was intended, viz., to convey to the human mind a lesson, a moral, a truth in nature, and last, but not the least, to serve as a basis upon which its inner aspirations and its more external faith might rest in security. When we come to examine the deep philosophical principles of such a wise system, we are almost astounded at the result of our researches, and the wisdom of human nature displayed in formulating such perfect analogies of truth, semi-truth, and of falsehood, according to the plane occupied by the individual. Let us take one instance, which will clearly explain all the rest, for they are built and formulated after the same model. Aeneas, of Greek myths and fables, is reputed to be the son of Venus by a mortal father, upon the plane of reality, as that of actual parent and child. Of course, this is an utter falsehood. To the rural population of long, long ago, and their simple rustic conceptions, it was a truth. Why so? Because they believed it, and to them it taught the required lesson of obedience to the powers that be. But if in reality it was a falsehood, how can it become a truth by the simple addition of acceptance and belief? Because it possessed a metaphysical truth, though not a physical one in the sense accepted. Aeneas, son of Venus, whose history is so beautifully preserved by the immortal Virgil, was, metaphysically speaking, son of the goddess, because he was, in his astral and magnetic nature, ruled and governed by Venus, born under one of her celestial signs, and when she was rising upon the ascendant of the house of life, even as Jesus Christos was born of a virgin, because Virgo was rising at his birth. Thus Aeneas was, in strict metaphysical reality, a son of Venus. Having satisfied the rural mind, which thus unconsciously accepts an absolute truth under a physical disguise, the metaphysical thinker, the philosopher, also accepts the same fable, knowing and realizing its more abstract truth. But again we are met with the objection that such a truth is only apparently a truth, i.e., on the plane of embodied appearances, and naturally the question arises, where, if at all, is the real truth of the mythos? That truth which is beyond the mere metaphysical thinker and commonplace philosopher, the truth which the initiates recognize, where is it? That truth lies far beyond the purview of astromythology. It is connected with the center of angelic life. Sufficient here to say that, as there are 7 races of humanity, 7 divisions to the human constitution, 7 active principles in nature, typified by the 7 rays of the solar spectrum, so are there 7 centers of angelic life, corresponding to the 7 planetary forces formulated in the science of the stars, and, as each one of us must, of necessity, belong to one of the particular angelic centers from which we originally emanated, the initiate can see no reason why Aeneas may not in reality belong to that celestial vortex represented by Venus upon the plane of material life. This being the case, we see how beautiful the ancient system of temple worship must have been. The simple rustic, in reverence and awe accepting the gross and physical meaning, the only one possible to his dark, sensuous mind. The scholar and philosopher bow their wiser heads with equal humility, accepting with equally sincere faith the more abstract form of the allegory, while on the other hand, the priest and the initiate, lifting their loftier souls above the earth and its formulas of illusion and matter, accept that higher and more spiritual application, which renders them equally as sincere and devout as their less enlightened worshipers. It is thus we find these astro myths true for all time, true in every age of the world, and equally true of all nations. The scholar and philosopher bow their wiser heads with equal humility, accepting with equally sincere faith the more abstract form of the allegory, while on the other hand, the priest and the initiate, lifting their loftier souls above the earth and its formulas of illusion and matter, accept that higher and more spiritual application, which renders them equally as sincere and devout as their less enlightened worshipers. It is thus we find these astro myths true for all time, true in every age of the world, and equally true of all nations. And this is the real reason why we find every nation under the sun possessing clear traditions relating to the same identical fables under different names, which are simply questions of nationality. And when mythologists, archaeologists, and philologists once recognize the one central cardinal truth, they will cease to wonder why nations, so widely separated by time and space, possess the same basic mythology. They will then no longer attempt its explanation by impossible migrations of races carrying the rudiments with them. They will find that the mythology was a complete science with the ancient sages, a universal mystery language in which all could converse, and that it descended from the golden age when there was but one nation on the face of the earth, the descendants of which constituted the basic nucleus of every race which has since had an existence. In this light, all is simple, clear, and easy to comprehend. All is natural. The astronomer priests of the horary past, when language was figurative and often pictorial, had recourse to a system of symbols to express abstract truths and ideas. In order to impress the minds of pupils with a true concept of the attributes of the celestial forces we call planets, they personified their powers, qualities, and attributes. Just as the average mind of today cannot conceive of deity apart from personality, so did primitive man clothe his ideas in actual forms, and in these impersonations they combined the nature of the celestial orb with that of the zodiacal sign or signs in which the planet exerted its chief and most potent activities. For instance, the planet Mars, whose chief constellation is Aries, was described as a great warrior, mighty in battle, fierce in anger, fearless, reckless, and destructive, while the mechanical and constructive qualities were personified as Vulcan, who forged the thunderbolts of Jove, built palaces for the gods, and made many useful and beautiful articles. Then again we find that Pallas Athena was the goddess of war and wisdom. She sprang from the head of Zeus. Aries rules the head and represents intelligence. Athena overcame her brother Mars in war, which shows that intelligence is superior to brute force and reckless courage. Here we see three different personages employed to express the nature of the powers and phenomena produced. They were called gods and goddesses. This was quite natural, as the planets of our system are reflections of divine principles. Esoterically, Mars symbolizes strength, victory, attributes of deity. Mars is said to have married Venus, teaching us that the union of skill and beauty are essential in all artistic work. Mythology tells us that the god Mars was supposed to be the father of Romulus, the reputed founder of Rome. Romulus displayed many characteristics of the planet. The mythos is no doubt a parallel to that of Aeneas. Rome was founded when the sun in his orbit had entered the sign Aries, and Mars was the god most honored by the Romans. In time, with the degeneration of human races and their worship to the rural mind, the subjects of the mythos became actual personalities endowed with every human passion and godlike attribute, the former characterizing the discordant influence of the heavenly bodies upon man. Ga, Rhea, and Ceres, or Demeter, Greek, represent the triune attributes of Mother Earth. Gaia signifies the earth as a whole, Rhea the productive powers of the earth, and Ceres utilizes and distributes the productive forces of Rhea. In the charming story of Eros, divine love, son of Mars and Venus, he, Eros, we are told, brings harmony out of chaos. Here we see the action of Aries and Taurus, ruled respectively by Mars and Venus. The beautiful myth of Aphrodite, born of the sea foam, is Venus rising out of the waters of winter to shine resplendent in the western skies at evening, and typifies the birth of forms, as all organic forms have their origin in water. In all lands the sun was known under various names, typical of solar energy, especially in reference to the equinoctial and solstitial colors. Henry Melville, in his valuable work, Veritas, says no reliance can be placed upon ancient dates, either of Europe, Asia, or anywhere else, and he conclusively shows that such dates are astro-Masonic points on the celestial planisphere, the events recorded being, as it were, terrestrial reflections of the celestial symbols. To attempt to wade through all the various systems of mythology, and explain each in its proper order, would be to write a large encyclopedia upon the subject. We have given a few examples as keys, and suggest works for study. We have here given the real key, and the student must fathom particulars for himself. The chief work, and most valuable in its line, is Ovid's Metamorphoses. The next, also the most valuable in its line, is the Mythological Astronomy of the Ancients, with notes. These latter are the gist and constitute the real value, by S.A. McKay. And last, and perhaps in some sense not the least, is the Wisdom of the Ancients, by Lord Bacon. This is published in Bacon's Essays. A careful study of Ovid, with the key which this chapter supplies, will reveal all that pertains to ancient gods, demigods, and heroes, while a study of Mackay and a careful comparison with La Clef and La Clef Hermetic will reveal all that pertains to cosmic cycles and astral chronology, which is the only chronology that is quite trustworthy as far as ancient history is concerned. While we are on this subject, we must point out some of the delusions into which the subtle magical teachings of the Orient would lead the student. All the monster, sphinx, half human, half animal, etc., which the ancients have preserved, are simply records of the past. They are chronological tables of cosmic time, and relate to eras of the past, of the sun's motion, and not by any means to living creatures, of antediluvian creations, as some wiseacres have imagined. Many of these ancient monuments, monstrous in form, are records of that awful period of floods and devastation known as the Iron Age, when there was a vertical sun at the poles, or in other words, when the pole of the earth was 90 degrees removed from the pole of the ecliptic. To those who can read aright, every lineament tells as plainly as the written word of history of that awful past, marking the march of time, recording the revolutions of the sun in his orbit of 25,920 years, and relating with wonderful accuracy the climatic changes in their latitudes, which took place with each revolution of the sun and corresponding motion of the earth's pole of less than 4 degrees. All the greater myths of the dim past were formulated to express cosmic time, solar and polar motion, and the phenomena resulting therefrom. These monuments of antiquity prove that the ancients knew a great deal more of the movements of heavenly bodies and of our planet than modern astronomers credit them with. Madame Blavatsky, in her Secret Doctrine, seriously states that all these monstrous forms are the types of actual, once living, physical embodiments, and, with apparent sincerity, asserts that the adepts teach such insane superstitions. Such, however, is not the case, neither is there anything true or even approaching the truth in the cosmogony given in the work in question. And lastly, we have but one more aspect of the grand old astro mythos to present to your notice. This aspect reveals the whole of the ancient classification of work and labor, and gives us a clear insight into the original designs or pictorial representations of the 12 signs and the 12 months of the year. It also clearly explains many things which are today attributed to superstitious paganism. As each month possesses its own peculiar season, so are, or were, the various labors of the husbandman and those of pastoral pursuits altered and diverted. Each month, then, bad a symbol which denoted the physical characteristics of climate and the temporal characteristics of work. As the sun entered the sign, so the temple rites varied in honor of the labors performed, and the symbol thus became the object of outward veneration and worship. So we see that the 12 signs, and principally the 4 cardinal ones, become deities and the symbols sacred, but in reality it was the same sun to which homage was paid. There is a large sphere of study in this direction, as, of course, each climate varied the symbol to suit its requirements. In Egypt there were 3 months when the land was overflowed with water. Hence they had only 9 working months out of doors, and from this fact sprang the 9 muses, while the 3 sirens represented the 3 months of inactivity in work, or 3 months of pleasure and festivity. Mackay tells us that the great Leviathan mentioned in the book of Job was the river Nile. In nearly all mythologies we find that the gods assembled on some high mountain to take counsel. The Olympus of the Greeks and Mount Zion of the Hebrew Bible mean the same, the pole star, and there on the pictured planisphere sits Cephus, the mighty Jove, with 1 foot on the pole star and all the gods gathered below him. The pole star is the symbol of the highest heaven. With this we close, leaving the endless ramifications of this deeply interesting subject to the student's leisure and personal research, trusting the keys we have given in this chapter and their careful study may induce the reader and student of these pages to search out for himself the meaning concealed in all astro mythologies. End of section 6. Recording by Jill Preston. Section 7 of The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Preston. The Light of Egypt, or the Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2, by Thomas Burgone. Chapter 6. Symbolism. At this point of our study, it is necessary to make a halt, and, before proceeding further, to attempt to formulate and realize that which, so far, we have been pursuing. First, then, we have passed in review the zodiac, and then the constellations. From this, we mentally surveyed both astrotheology and astromythology, and now it is our first duty to realize these in their real significance, and this consists in a clear comprehension of the grand law of correspondences. What is this law? It is the law of symbolism, and symbolism, rightly understood, is the one divine language of Mother Nature, a language wherein all can read, a language that defies the united efforts of both time and space to obliterate it. For symbolism will be the language of nature as long as spirit expresses itself to the divine soul of man. No matter where we turn, nor where we look, There is spread out to our view a vast panorama of symbolic forms for us to read. In whatever form, angle, or color they present themselves, the true student of nature can interpret and understand their symbolic language aright. It has been by the personification of nature's symbols that man has become ignorant of their language. There is no form, sound, nor color but what has its laws of expression, and only a perfect knowledge of symbolism will enable man to know the law, power, and meaning lying behind such manifestations. The law of expression is exact, and as unalterable as Deity himself. The physical senses cannot vibrate to these interior forces, and through them comprehend their law. The physical senses vibrate to the spirit's expression, not to the powers, forces, and laws which brought them into objective existence. Countless numbers of mystics, if such they deserve to be called, among present-day students speak and write very learnedly upon the law of correspondence, and few, if any, of them really understand or know anything at all of that law. The intellect alone cannot solve the problems of this law. It cannot grasp the true interior and spiritual meaning, except in just so far as intellect is capable of externalizing them. The inmost spiritual truths that cannot be demonstrated to the outward senses never have, nor never will, appeal to anyone who has not the interior ability to comprehend them. There was a time when men ruled by pure intellect, without its accompanying other half, intuition. They were looked upon as monstrosities. This state of purely intellectual development has been brought about by the positive, masculine principle, reason, absorbing its counterpart, the intuition, the feminine portion, and the result, by correspondence, is as fatal as upon the interior plane, where the positive, masculine soul denies the existence of his mate, thus setting upon his throne only a portion of himself as his idol, and then reasons himself into the belief that he is complete. Love has been cast out, ignored, and forgotten, until at last she departs, leaving a vacancy that eternity cannot fill. This is somewhat similar to their elusive devachan, an ideal, a mere mystical sentiment to gush over, but a something they do not in reality comprehend. Therefore, we shall do our utmost to explain this universal law, and to point out wherein its first principles are manifest. Once these are mastered, the golden rule will explain all the rest. As it is below, so it is above. As on the earth, so in the sky. Here, then, is our first lesson on the subject of reality, which constitutes the Hermetic science of correspondences. First, realize that a line or an angle, for instance, is something more than its mere mathematical outline. It corresponds to some power, force, or principle within the great anima mundi of the mysteries that are trying to find expression in their evolutionary journey in forms. Let us illustrate our meaning. A point or dot is what? Well, externally, it is the alpha of all mathematics. It is the first finite manifestation of the spiritual force. Within that dot lies concealed in embryo all the future possibilities of the manifesting principle. This dot or point is a something to begin with, a form externalized, from which all future forms may spring forth, and they may be infinite, both in number and variety. First, a primary, simple idea, from which all ideas and thoughts, intricate and complex, have their being. A point extended is a straight line, scientifically expressed, whereas in real truth there is no such thing as a straight line. That is to say, it is a form increased or multiplied by itself, and therefore is an extension in space that can be measured, and each extension means a new form, an additional symbol. It has taken on new aspects, new relations, hence contains the second principle of mathematics, so to say. But besides being points, they are symbols. They are principles in nature as clearly related to each other as the leaf and the stem of plant life. Each monad or point in the universe is the beginning of something, equally so. It is also the termination of its own forces in that particular action, and will remain inert until it becomes acted upon by something else. A point, then, is a primary simple idea, a straight line. An angle is the same idea, rendered greater and more complex, and refers to the same forces upon a different plane. And the more we multiply the angles, the more complex and far-reaching becomes the symbol, and the more numerous and diverse becomes its planes of action. Here we will introduce an example. A trine represents three forces or angles, and when united form a trinity, hence harmony. Its apex, when above, is celestial, therefore represents the male forces of spirit. A trine reversed also represents the same forces, with its apex in matter, hence it is negative. In these two complex ideas, clearly represented by these symbols, we have all matter and spirit, and yet they are but extensions of our point in space, rendered far-reaching and complex by the position and the number of angles presented. Let us turn the key once again, and we find that both spirit and matter possess the same outline in their primal concept, except reversed, polarized. Let us unite these two trines, and we have a still more potent form, a symbol almost infinitely complex. We have spirit and matter united, or rather, three rays of force, positive meeting three rays of force, negative at a given point. Thus, we have 6 points, also 6 sides, the ultimate of which is a cube. All are now equal. It is the first force of a crystallization, creation of matter. Once again, let us turn the key, and we have our two conceptions in a metaphysical sense. The trine, with its apex above, is as the trine with its apex below. Both the same in form, yet vibrating to very different planes, and a very different language is required to read and interpret their meaning aright. The spiritual, or the trine, with its apex above, draws its influence from the celestial, and as it condenses and takes on form in the trine of matter, it transmits this same divine force through its apex, which points below to matter. The double trine is found upon every plane, obeying the divine law of correspondences. It is in this sense called Solomon's seal, because it is the grand hieroglyphic of the Hermetic law. As it is above, so it is below. As on the earth, so in the sky. To continue this line of reasoning or speculation, let us say, would lead us beyond the firm basis of human reason. It would escape the grasp of intellect, to which I am compelling this course of instruction to bend. But it would never take us beyond the real limits of the universe. Yet, not to extend our investigations, we would ever remain in the lower trine, in the realms of effects, and lose sight entirely of the trine of spirit, from whence originated the force and potency in the form of matter. Therefore it is that the science of symbolism has been evolved and formulated. The symbols, the manifestations, are ever present, and the study of effects will, to a developed soul, suggest the cause, the nature of the principle back of it, as well as the law which would produce such effects. Such is the science of symbolism, and it bounds and binds back into a religio-philosophical system, each class of symbols and each plane of manifestation, as securely as modern savants have divined the province of chemistry, magnetism, and mathematics, and, so far, these bounds are useful. But it is only a question of time and space, after all, because, when resolved back, or let us say, evolved up into their abstract principles, chemistry, magnetism, and mathematics are purely arbitrary terms to express special features of the same one eternal thing or science, which is existence, and it, in turn, is consciousness. Not that external consciousness of existence, not that knowledge and love of living, but that interior conscious correction. But it is only a question of time and space, after all, because, when resolved back, or, let us say, evolved up into their abstract principles, chemistry, magnetism, and mathematics are purely arbitrary terms to express special features of the same one eternal thing or science, which is existence, and it, in turn, is consciousness. Not that external consciousness of existence, not that knowledge and love of living, but that interior conscious knowledge, which tells us why and how we exist, by what force and power we are sustained and permitted to obey and carry out the law of mediumship, reception and transmission, attraction and repulsion, spiritual and material, that ultimately blend and become as one, the double trine, and united with the divine ego of its being, becomes complete. 7. The perfected number of form. The sum total, then, of all, and the value it may possess to the individual, is measured by his ability to perceive, for there is nothing external that is not in some sense mental, and there is nothing mental that is not in some sense spiritual. The sides of the triangle, physical, mental, and spiritual, and the apex where meet the mental and spiritual, forms the center of contact to higher trines in realms above. Where mind is not, there are no symbols, no ideas, no manifestations. The spirit has not yet reached that point in its evolutionary journey where it can yet crystallize its projected force, power, or ideas into forms, for everything that is the outcome of divine thought, and expresses within itself the symbol of its being. This is the arcana of the law of correspondences. Remember the above teaching, because upon its full comprehension rests the ability to read symbols aright. It will aid the soul to fully realize that the vast universe is but the mental image of the Creator, that there is no such thing as manifested existence apart from mind, and consequently, the infinite worlds that float securely in space, blushing and scintillating with light of life and love of the Father, revealing to mortal minds some faint conception of the awful resources and recesses within nature's star-making laboratory, are but the scintillating reflection of life, the reactions of mental phenomena. So, too, with the mental creative powers of the mind of man, for not a vibration that proceeds from his every thought, but what creates its correspondence in the creative realm of spirit. Hence, symbolism continues giving to the soul of man throughout eternity food for thought and contemplation. All symbols, then, are objectified ideas, whether human or divine, and as such possess a real meaning, and this meaning is altered, extended, and rendered more complex with every additional thing or influence by which we find it surrounded, or with which we find it correlated. For instance, $1.00 means $1. Add 6 ciphers to the left, 0000001, and it is still the same $100 and no more, because their position is previous or before the 1. But add the same number of ciphers to the right, $1, 0000000, and lo, we find a wondrous change of force, power, and consequence. We see all the mighty power of our million of money, and the possibilities and responsibilities with which, in these days, it becomes associated. So it is with everything else in nature. Man pays the penalty by increased responsibility for every step in knowledge that he takes, as well as every dollar in gold he procures. Dollars, as well as talents, have to be accounted for, and their usefulness increased tenfold. The dollars must not be buried nor hoarded.